Hello, me again, Shay LaFontaine. As promised, here is my full uncut interview with Ben Stimpson, who has a really amazing wealth of knowledge about witchcraft and the ways that it ties into history and culture. Once again, I suggest listening to episode 29 of History Fix about witches first, as this interview is a follow-up bonus to that. So maybe we could just start with an introduction, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, your name, kind of what you do.
Absolutely. So my name is Ben Stimpson. I'm a psychotherapist, I'm an author, and I'm also a student. I'm currently completing a Bachelor in Liberal Studies with focus on classical, medieval, and religious studies at the University of Waterloo. I'm also a pagan author, so my book just recently came out through Llewellyn, and so I've really been steeped in paganism, witchcraft, and magic for the past 20 years.
Great. I love that you have a little bit of a history background too. I've looked a lot into the history of what happened in the 15th, 16th, 1700s with witch hunts and hangings and burnings and just really a lot of terrible tragedies. I'm looking at more of a modern angle of, what is witchcraft today, or what is a witch today? And it seems to me it still has a connotation of evil or devil worshiping that kind of goes back to the 15th century, really. So I was hoping you could speak a little to that. Is there evil involved? Is there devil worshiping involved? Or what is it really in a modern world?
Absolutely. So it's a complicated answer because now there are multiple streams of witchcraft. So I think we need to, first of all, we need to lay the foundations. What we're talking about kind of witchcraft in this modern sense community, we're really focusing on European-based traditions. We're not focused on other religious traditions outside of Europe, or of that European cultural sphere. Things like African traditional religions, Tantra, any of the Asian traditions, or any of the traditions from South America or North America. Those were traditions that were had that word witchcraft or paganism applied to them and were used to denounce them. But we're not talking about that in the modern sense. So the modern sense, there is a very thriving interest in using magic and using witchcraft in the modern sense. What we're looking at really is kind of neo-paganism, Wicca, which is the kind of the modern religion of witchcraft. And now we also have these streams coming forward that go back even further into the medieval ages of cunning craft, so folkloric craft. And those really are the types of the uses of witchcraft or magic that were nestled within the Christian worldview, that are related to folklore, that you find in, if you open any of the old folklore books and see superstitions or charms or amulets or anything like that, that's the type of magic that we're talking about with that folkloric craft. That comes from that more cunning folk. That's the academic term. So a little different from witchcraft, but still within the sphere. I think most people who go to any metaphysical shop, or who are going to the local bookstore and go to the metaphysical section, you're going to be seeing books that are connected to Wicca. Now you're starting to see that folkloric craft come out, and then also kind of a jumble of all other traditions.
Okay, so yeah, you said the word Wicca and pagan. So is Wicca, that is a pagan religion, but are there other pagan religions as well? Is that seems like more of a broad term? And then Wicca is like a specific type.
A very specific tradition, exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Pagan has been used by Christianity for a very long time to describe anything other than paganism, anything other than Christianity. In the modern sense, that's a really outdated term now, but in a modern sense, neo-paganism is any of those self-identified traditions that are connected with kind of bringing back ancient pre-Christian traditions. You're looking at ancient Egyptian, you're looking at ancient Greek and Rome, ancient Celtic, ancient Norse and Scandinavian, ancient Germanic, ancient Slavic, right? Kind of anything outside of that kind of gets into a jumble still. So then Wicca is one pagan faith within that broader kind of family.
Okay. Do you think people who who practice Wicca or any of these pagan religions that you kind of mentioned, do you think a lot of them use the term witch, or do you think people are kind of shying away from calling themselves a witch because of the misconceptions and that sort of like evil connotation that people put on it?
I think that there's at one point when Wicca was emerging in the 1950s, when it was starting to become a group and it started to initiate people, that word witch was trying to be identified with kind of a root word, wicke, which is really has that similar root to wise. So they were trying to reclaim that word witch as the craft of the wise. There's a whole history kind of behind why Wicca emerged. Really, it comes out as a response to the Industrial Revolution. It was an attempt to kind of come back to kind of older ancient sources, but it was really a jumble of other things. And so I would say that the majority of people who are Wiccan refer to themselves as witches. I think that since then Wicca became a thing, other groups, other people started to latch onto that word again as a reclaiming thing during the 1960s and 70s. And so then witch became kind of the word that most people were using. I think now we're seeing the pendulum swinging the other way. People are starting to, especially practitioners who are connecting in with their folkloric and their kind of regional identities, and are finding words that are relating to those identities. So on my podcast a few weeks ago, I do a podcast where I interview magical practitioners, particularly folklore practitioners. And one of the trends is using titles that are very much embedded in each community. And many of those communities would see witch as being an evil thing, an evil non-human creature. So you wouldn't identify yourself as one. You would instead call yourself like a witch doctor, or you would call yourself a wart doctor, or a cunning man, or a wise woman is another a big one that is coming out. Also regional languages. So where I'm from in the United Kingdom, I live in Canada now, but I'm originally from the UK. A lot of regional practitioners are taking up Welsh, Scottish, Gaelic, Irish words for themselves, so that they're not using that English word witch.
Yeah, it's because when I think of witch, and I'm sorry about this, but I think of like the Halloween, like the witch with the pointy hat and the broom, and
Mm-hmm.
like the Wicked Witch from The Wizard of Oz. So I know it
Yes.
has a very strong, they have a very strong mental image when you hear the word
Mm-hmm.
witch. But it seems like these people who practice Wicca or it seems like a totally different thing. So it's just it gets a little confusing there, I guess. Where do you think these misconceptions, you talked about the evil, people thinking of a witch as evil. Where do you think those misconceptions came from mostly, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's very much cultural based. I think that particularly that word witch, and when you look kind of cross culturally in every culture, there seems to be like an archetype of a dangerous non-human hag or crone or being in the forest, right? I think that then was conflated with the idea of devil worshipping, and so traditionally, when you look at European kind of witchcraft and magic use, there's some fantastic studies and books out there that show this in detail. But you generally had within that Christian worldview two streams. You had individuals who were with the devil and individuals who were with God. So when a lot of the witchcraft trials that were going on, it wasn't witchcraft that they were being killed about. It was because they were aligning themselves with the devil. That was what and so you got into this idea of apostasy, right, which was a major sin in the medieval age. So really, that idea of um, the two streams, most magic users would have seen themselves as good Christians in the same way that now you go to any folk healer in like South America or Italy or around the world, most folk healers who are strong, oh no, I'm Christian, oh no, I'm Buddhist, right? Even though they're practicing magic and all sorts of things. I think that's kind of the stream of it. I think the misconception then comes in with that word witch, right? I also think that because of Victorian storytelling, so many of the wicked witches in those stories are told to us as children. We raised up, and then suddenly we're hearing, oh, these people are witches. Oh, well, we don't know anything about that. And I think that also that understanding that magic has been a part of culture for such a very long time has been lost. So in the past 150 years, most people, especially with that kind of rationalism, modernism piece, has conflated that with the idea of superstition beneath us, ridiculous. In a religious sense, then I think it was also very understandable that witches in those senses. You look in the Bible, many of the evil figures in that are witches, right? So I think that conflation is a very old one. I think it's a very complex one, but I think that's where that misunderstanding comes in, and also the fact that even the word witch, right? I mean, if people had used the word wise people or cunning folk or whatnot, that doesn't have the same sting as witch. And so I think that also comes into it. People have those assumptions of what that word means, what those people do, and that's why.
Yeah. Do you think, you kind of made me think, a lot of our history and our fairy tales and stories and things come from Europe. We're very like Eurocentric culture, even here in the United States and in Canada. Do you think that has a lot to do? Because it almost seems like other cultures might be a little bit more accepting of a witch or of Wicca, of a pagan religion. I'm coming from doing a few episodes about the Algonquian, that were the indigenous people of the eastern U.S., and kind of reading up on their religion. It's actually reminding me a little bit of them. They were very spiritual. They had several different spirits that they worshipped, and it was very misunderstood by the European settlers who came here. So it's kind of making me wonder if other parts of the world that aren't so that our culture isn't so based on might be a little more accepting, or less quick to judge it as an evil thing. I don't know if you've
Well, that's the thing, right? So I think we need to understand that we're judging this based on Judeo-Christian worldview, which is this, like, that sense of evil and what that cultural understanding of evil is. So in other cultures, they don't have those same senses of evil. They would be judging it based on their own worldviews, right? So I think that if you look around the world, vast majority of cultures have this, what could be analogous to magic, right? And often those streams lie kind of just adjacent or parallel to the main spiritual traditions. So I did a study a few years ago on Buddhism, and if you look at like Buddhist amulets and Buddhist magic in Buddhism, in like Thailand, for example, Buddhist Thailand, on the one hand, it doesn't make any sense why they would be practicing magic when you look at Buddhism in the book sense. But this speaks to a much broader idea of lived religion and lived culture, right? There are many places within lived culture. And magical thinking is, I think, a baseline biological, psychological part of being a human, right? We have this idea of that we can control through symbolic and through relating to the world around us through ritual. That's really the source of religion. The idea of the disconnection between religion and magic then really depends on each culture. So, for example, one of the traditions I belong to is an African-based tradition. So in those traditions, priests perform rituals working with spirits, and for magical ends, but they would never call themselves witches, because the witch concept in that tradition is an evil entity that's connected with the dark and the death and whatnot. And so what they do isn't witchcraft. That's why it's such a highly offensive thing when modern witches who are of a European base look at those traditions. They say, oh, well, that's witchcraft. No, it isn't witchcraft. That's not how they identify it. That's not how they conceptualize it. So it's one of those, like, it's a cross-cultural thing. I think that it depends on the culture, right? But I would say that, because Christianity is, I think, 2 billion people in the world, most of Christian cultures around the world will have that touch and will probably not be as inviting. But it also depends. You go down to South America, Catholic South America at that, and you will see folk practices and folk magic and folk traditions all over the place. So it's an interesting thing. I think it depends on the culture.
Yes, it is. It seems very complex.
Yeah.
I'm realizing.
Yes.
Have you personally experienced any kind of persecution or harsh judgment from people, um, based on what you practice? Do you feel like you've been judged harshly personally?
Absolutely. So when I was when I moved to Canada as a young kid, I was very interested in folklore and British folk kind of traditions. And when I was a teenager, I came out as queer, and for me, my queerness was really connected in with my magic. That's kind of how I started to explore myself with. And I lived in a tiny town of 8,000 people, and in like there was like 28 churches. It was a ridiculous number of churches, right? All different denominations. And I remember when I first started to explore and bring books to school, like reading them, people would say, "Oh, that's evil," or "You're an evil witch," or all of that, right? So I have experienced that. I think that culturally, though, things have shifted. I think people are a lot more interested in and on the down low, more accepting in the West of that. I think that in certain circles, particularly evangelical circles, there's still that feeling. But then let's be honest here, a lot of evangelical circles would be feeling anything different from them is evil, right? That's just that part of that Protestant mindset, right?
Yes, I live in the American South, so I'm very familiar
Yeah.
with that mindset.
Yeah.
And I hope it is changing. I like to think it is. And that people are becoming a little more accepting of other things. Do you think there are people who you might have touched on this, but who identify as witches that do try to use it for evil or to do harm? Is that a thing, or is that just kind of a misconception?
No, absolutely, it is a thing. Yes, when you step out of that Judeo-Christian mindset, when you step out of that morality, then things become a little different, right? And there are a lot of people who use baneful magic, people who use. I wouldn't even call it evil, because again, the sense of evil is different in a lot of these traditions. I think that when you see it in that way, it depends on what the context. So if somebody is harming somebody else and you need to curse them to stop them from harming others, then yes, that's cursing them, but that's to prevent them from doing something else. If somebody is coming from a place of spite and they are coming from a place of, I'm going to hurt you because you hurt me, then again, that sense of evil intent it depends on the situation. Definitely there are people who would and do use magic because of their own base kind of ego and their own base emotions. And that I think from a lot of cultural standards that would be seen as evil. There are also streams of witchcraft now emerging that work with something called the folk devil. And within those traditions, the folk devil is seen not as the Christian devil, but as the figure that when Christians came into an area, let's say, northern France or England or wherever, came into an area and saw an ancient pagan deity being worshipped or an ancient folk spirit being venerated, they would then identify that as the devil, and that's evil. And so these individuals are now working with the other. It's that sense of liminality. It's that sense of understanding kind of other as being powerful. And so in working with that way, they're using that word devil as kind of a counter reclaiming of her Christianity. Put that out there. I know down in Bolivia, this isn't just a European thing. And I know down in Bolivia, there's a mountain god called El Diablo, and in the mines down there, they worship this mountain deity to say, protect us in the mines, please don't, kill us, all this. And the figure looks like a classical devil, but it's understood as a local folk deity. So it's one of those kind of, it's a thing, but they wouldn't see themselves as evil. Others might see them as evil, but they wouldn't see themselves as evil. So
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's bringing me back again to the Algonquian. They had they have like a very benevolent spirit that they don't even really have to worship because he's just so kind and he doesn't like take revenge or anything. So they spend kind of all their focus worshiping this more malevolent spirit. I mean, more like a devil, right? So when the
he is
Europeans
right.
came, yeah, so when the Europeans came, they saw that, oh, they're worshiping the devil, but it's just a
Right.
difference in the way that the religion works, where we don't need to worship the kind one because he's not going to hurt us. We need to keep this one happy so that we're protected and that sort of thing. So it's very interesting. I'm kind of drawing parallels there. I guess the last thing I have for you really is just what do you want people to know about Wicca or about witchcraft? What do you want kind of the takeaway to be for listeners who are really coming from a place of not knowing anything about this?
Totally. Well, I think that the main piece here is to stay in your own lane, right? I think that a lot of people, especially coming from that Judeo-Christian mindset, even if they don't ascribe to it anymore, still have that worldview as a subconscious thing. And I think that the major point here is to step out of that worldview, try to see it from somebody else's worldview, and so with Wicca, witchcraft, or whatever. Judging any tradition based on your own standards is not going to get you very far, and you're never actually going to understand those traditions. So, speak to people, but there's all sorts of books, all sorts of documentaries. Since the pandemic, there's all sorts of content online. Listen to some of the voices of those traditions, listen to how they're interacting and understanding, and also know it's okay not to understand it all. You don't have to understand it all, but you also, can't be making judgments based on something you don't understand either. So it's one of those things. Understand yourself so that you can engage fully, but that's like any religious tradition. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Wicca is okay, Wicca is good because it's a nature-based religion, blah, blah, blah. I feel like a lot of people have said that over the years to appease. And the reality is my witchcraft, my magic, my cunning craft, my folkloric craft, whatever I'm calling it, is nothing to do with you. And so just like your religion is nothing to do with me. So I feel like coming from that place will open up the conversation, but there's more than enough content out there right now to like podcast interviews. Since podcasting became a big thing like a few years ago, I think all of the major writers have been interviewed. So tap into that. And that's really all I would say, really.
All right. And where can people find you? I know you have a podcast and a website. Can you kind of share where we can find you if we
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Definitely. Absolutely. So, and that ties into it. My podcast, Essence Podcast with Ben Stimpson, you can find it on Spotify and I think Apple and Amazon. I also have it on YouTube too, Ben Stimpson Author. I've been really focusing on interviewing a lot of the major figures in folkloric and traditional craft right now. And I have about 48 episodes under my belt right now. So a lot of interviews, a lot of content. You can go to benstimpson.com. I do actually offer a course coming up on the history of the occult and the history of magic. So if people are interested, I also have links to friends who also create that content too. So benstimpson.com, everything's on there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. You have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening, and thank you to Ben for sharing his knowledge with us. Remember to tune back in this Sunday for your next full-length episode of History Fix in my Spooktober series coming at you all month long.